Hi, this is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast. If you've been listening to my podcast, you know that we talk a lot about different things to do with culture. And one of the things that I love to talk about is food. And maybe that's because I'm a bit of a foodie and I love food and I appreciate good food. Or maybe it's just because of the fact that food is so culturally interesting that there's so much we can learn about studying food that we can learn about other cultures. Today, I want to answer the question, are hamburgers American? There's a little bit of controversy about this, about whether hamburgers are American. But I believe that they are American food, and I will tell you the reasons why. Years ago, there was a beef style called the Hamburg, which was out there, Hamburg, Germany, Hamburg style beef, which was consumed raw, and then it was, became part of the city's identity. It was, traditionally serving like a raw beef or a raw pork and atop a slice of bread. Then it was a doctor in the mid 1880s in America, and his name was Salisbury. And he saw many of his patients coming in, maybe that were getting sick because they were eating this Hamburg style beef. There were many Germans that were coming to the United States. So these, German restaurants were opening that were serving the Hamburg style beef. And so he suggested, why don't you try to cook it instead? And that's sort of how it became known. Patties became cooked and became known as the Salisbury steak, basically after this Dr. James Salisbury. But it didn't start then. It didn't stop then. So it's really difficult for most people to really trace where did the actual hamburger originate from. Because there's stories of it, coming from roadside restaurants in Wisconsin, Connecticut, Ohio, New York, and Texas. And I know Wisconsin, Ohio, and New York, those were all places where there were a lot of German immigrants were coming in, other immigrants from Europe. So it's really hard to tell who's the one who actually really started the hamburger as we know it today. But we do know that in 1904 in St. Louis, the World's Fair took place. And at the World's Fair, one of the foods that they had introduced was known as the hamburger to the broader American audience. It became very popular. What's also interesting to note that at the same World's Fair was other favorites were also introduced, such as waffle ice cream cones, cotton candy, peanut butter, and iced tea, all which remain favorites today. But after the World's Fair, many people liked the hamburger, but it was slightly afterwards, there was a bit of a setback that happened. There was a reputation problem with a lot of the beef. And in particular, a lot of the beef slaughterhouses. A man by the name of Upton Sinclair published a novel called The Jungle. So a lot of people stopped wanting to eat ground beef. They thought it was unhealthy because there were fillers in it. They didn't know exactly what was in the beef. So the hamburger kind of lost popularity. But it was actually White Castle, the hamburger group White Castle, that in 1921... it was Edgar Billy Ingram and Walter Anderson that they opened the first White Castle restaurant in Wichita, Kansas. They began to set a new standard for the industry that wasn't just the food that drew the people in, but the restaurant's commitment to cleanliness. They made the restaurants very clean, like they were a lot of chrome they used, and they were restaurants where people went in and they felt like this is a clean establishment. And so they had sparkling clean interiors and exteriors that gave this, contrast to this real cleanliness going on. And so they introduced, several innovations with the hamburger's image, and they began to revolutionize the food industry. They had their own meat grinding on site, so they ground up their own meat. And so people knew that the meat was fresh and didn't have a lot of different fillers on it. It was actually White Castle's success, which helped start other iconic brands that many of us know today. Iconic brands like the McDonald's and the famous In-N-Out Burger both started in 1948. By the way, if you haven't eaten at an In-N-Out Burger, I recommend you do. They're mostly in California, but they make excellent hamburgers, and they still make hamburgers and fries like they do from the old method of years ago. Then, Burger King came in 1954. And Wendy's in 1969. So they're all in debt to White Castle. They all owe the debt to White Castle, which still has some restaurants today, but is not as big as some of these others. But White Castle helped pave the way for the hamburgers. It was actually really McDonald's that started to globalize the hamburgers throughout the world. You can go almost anywhere in the world today and you will find McDonald's there. If there's not McDonald's there, there's probably McDonald's is considering to open up there because McDonald's is literally around the world. It's been so interesting for me for like a country like Hong Kong that, Wendy's has tried to come in there. Arby's has tried to come in there. Burger King is there to some extent, but still it's really McDonald's that leads the way. McDonald's is everywhere in Hong Kong. And even in China itself, you can go to the South High-Speed train station in Guangzhou, and you will find not only one, but there's 2 McDonald's in the train station. That's how popular McDonald's is becoming in China today. You can find McDonald's all over China in train stations and, on the roadside places where people stop and fill gas. You can find McDonald's all over the place today throughout China, Hong Kong. Even there's McDonald's here now in Vietnam. There's, McDonald's is essentially everywhere. So it's really McDonald's who went and popularized the idea of the hamburger, that the hamburger, is essentially American food. That is why I really believe that when people say, well, the hamburger as we know it today is American food. It didn't really start in Hamburg, Germany. The hamburger is something which really became American. Yes, it had its influence from the Hamburg beef in Hamburg, Germany, but really it was the America that refined it as American food. It was people like White Castle, the White Castle hamburger joint. It was McDonald's. It was Burger King. It was Wendy's. It was In-N-Out Burger. All of those began to refine the hamburger as we know the hamburger today. So when you look at this debate as to whether or not the hamburger is American food, I have to say that the hamburger definitely is an American food and is, it is. When you think of America and you think of American food, you need to think about a hamburger because it is an American food in every way. I remember, witnessing years ago when I lived in Sweden, the first McDonald's coming into Stockholm, Sweden. Everyone was so excited and we lined up and we went there and we went to McDonald's and we got so excited to get our hamburger. I still remember the Swedes weren't quite sure about it. And now today there's McDonald's everywhere throughout Sweden. That's how phenomenal McDonald's growth has continued to be around the world, especially when it comes to hamburgers. So if anyone asks and wants to know, is hamburger an American food? Yes, it is an American food. It is not from Hamburg, Germany. And these are the reasons why, because it really is an invention or creation that happened in the United States way back in the early 1900s. And in fact, even though it was in other restaurants along the way, the first place it was really introduced to the American public at large was at the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. Thank you so much for listening to this. We hope you've enjoyed this, that you've enjoyed our Dusty Roads podcast, which is part of our blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road. If you go onto our blog post, A Bus on a Dusty Road, you can find more great content. You can also find some information for the book that I wrote called A Bus on a Dusty Road, Life Lessons from Living in Asia. If you're interested in learn more about life in Asia, you can go there and find out more about how you can purchase the book. We'd like to thank you so much for being part of our community. We hope that you'll subscribe to us, give us a thumbs up, that you will tell others about us, and basically spread the word about living on the dusty roads of life and living your life as a global citizen. Thank you so much.